Started. I'm going to go ahead and it's recording our breakout room. So let's maybe that actually works. All right. So hello everyone. I'm going to get us started, and I'm going to bring up the slides that were lovingly prepared by Nicole Gray, and so as you all are most likely aware of, we spent a good amount of time, more than a year, doing some groundwork to understand the eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism. It was identified during our strategic planning process in 2018, 2019 as a major priority for the congregation. And we took that charge seriously, and in the summer of 2019, we began to outline some of the programs that we would need, and we began to really share the information and education and grounding we needed. And I'm not going to go through all the programs we did, but just to remind you all what the eighth principle is, let me do this here. And one thing I've learned of doing Zoom is I need to minimize my own screens when. Why won't that happen? All right. All right. So the eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism simply states, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. Hold on. All right. Now, I'm going to stop my screen share. I'm having a hard time with my functionality for some reason, and I don't know why. And now it's not letting me see my cursor, so I don't know what's going on. Maybe if I do this. Okay, that's better. I'm still screen sharing, but everything's in the way. All right, now you guys may actually be able to see what's on the screen. Here we go again. So our adoption of the eighth principle was built into the strategic plan, as I said. It's under the Ministry of Service and Social Justice. The goals component was to provide a place for members, friends, and supporters of our congregation to fulfill the outreach inherent in our mission statement, to collectively act on our shared UU principles, to implement initiatives that further work to bring an end to systemic inequalities within UUCM locally and globally. And the specific objective was to work to educate UUCM on the eighth principle and to adopt it as a congregation. All right. All right. And I think I'm going to come back to this slide. One of the things that's most important that we felt about the whole eighth principle process was continuing to deepen our understanding of how different oppressions and injustices intersect. And with that, I'm going to turn this over now to Jane to take the next piece about this. I think this was a pretty straightforward. And to finish up that last thought. The congregation adopted the eighth principle nearly unanimously at our June 6th annual meeting. Jane?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome. It's nice to see you all. Annalise is going to share the slides for this particular session that I'm doing, which is about trainings that the Undoing Racism team has identified and is recommending that leaders from the congregation, and really anyone from the congregation, take. And because of there's so many, we wanted to identify them. So we've worked with Anya over the last year and started off with writing a one-page summary of each of them. And then Anya asked us to do a one-page digest of all of them. And what you're getting is the Cliff Notes on Steroids version in the slides here. So the first organization which offers training is one that we've been talking about for over 2 decades. That is an anti-racist training by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. Then you'll see the other 2 ones, and they'll each have their own slides. So Annalise, if you can go to the next one, that would be great. I don't know if you could make it a little bigger. I mean,
sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Just give me a second. Yeah,
okay.
1 second.
Take your time. The People's Institute for Survival and Beyond is an organization based in New Orleans that this is the training that we offer a scholarship for from the Undoing Racism team budget. Because of our in-depth knowledge of this training and the efficacy of the training, we decided that also people that have taken it, it essentially changes their lives in terms of doing anti-racist work. And this is why the Undoing Racism team supports this training very wholeheartedly, shall we say. This training was, the Undoing Racism team was the first organization that brought the training to New Jersey in 1992. So it's almost, as old as the committee, but I think we did it in the second year that the committee was formed. So it is usually a 2.5-day intensive workshop that really has, and it's on Zoom now, of course, like everything. In its analysis, it helps people to link racism to systems and class. It provides a common definition for racism, and I'll let you kind of read through that as well. And what the graduates most find is that it does give us a shared language to be more effective in our work. So there's probably over 3,500 people that have taken this in the state of New Jersey now. And when I was at the General Assembly in 2017 in New Orleans, they offered 3 sections of this that were totally filled. Like 90 UUs from across the country had taken this training. So it is pricey. That's why we offer a half scholarship for it. And you would be in touch with Annalise or myself, I guess, but Annalise is the lead at this point of Undoing Racism, as all of you know. And we would work out the arrangements in terms of telling you how to get registered, how you would get reimbursed for the training for this particular training. The last time they offered it on Zoom, it happened to be a Friday, a Saturday, and a Sunday. So it wasn't Friday night like usual. They shortened the hours on Saturday and Sunday, but it was a full, not a full 3 days, it was shortened days too. But so this training is the one that we primarily recommend. And I'm not sure how long I'm supposed to be, but so let's just go to the second slide so I can tell you about this training. So I think, has there anybody here that's been to the Beloved Conversations training? Annalise, myself, I don't know if anybody else here did it. Okay, well, Beloved Conversations is a series of, it's weeks long session to offer and designed by the Meadville Lombard School to really give you a spiritual basis on which to work accountably to dismantle racism in yourself. It's really quite an extensive program, and it's all throughout the country. UUA has offered it all throughout the country. We did have 35 UUCMers take it in the fall. Several more continued on in the spring. There's different levels of this training, and there is a cost that's similar to the other training, which is $300. So this is not a quick fix, just like we say in the People's Institute trainings. There's no quick fix for racism, right? But there is a way through these trainings through Beloved Conversations to learn on a daily, weekly, basis on which you can work to help UUs who are BIPOC, who identify as BIPOC, and their registration, I understand, has closed for the fall, but you could also join in the spring for their different levels of workshop, and you would go onto their website to decide which one is best for you. Or I'm sure you could talk to people like Annalise and me who have been through it. Anya and Scott, I think, also are very familiar with it as well, if that is something that you are interested in doing. And then let's go on to the next one. So this is also a very interesting training. Now, I have not been through it. Annalise has not been through it, but it's the Central East region of the UUA. So you all know the UUA is this big, national group, but we're broken down into regions. And what is so cool about this training is that it was designed by Paula Cole-Jones, one of the authors of the Eighth Principle. So their training coming up, I do have the dates for that one. I didn't have the dates for the People's Institute training because it just hasn't been updated on their website yet. But the People's Institute training, the first one, it's usually offered every 2 months. So the Jubilee training, as it's called, is the Central East region of the UUA. And my sense from looking at their information is that it's somewhat similar to the People's Institute training. Of course, it's going to have a UUA focus and understanding of UU principles, certainly worked in. And I've been to workshops by Paula Cole-Jones and Dr. Leon Spencer. They're just fantastic. I don't know the third person there. So their training is online as well. And it's usually also the times I've seen, well, you can see it there, probably Friday night, Saturday, and a Sunday. And it's $170 per participant. So that's the summary of those 3 trainings that we do recommend. I have a 1-page digest summary that I can also send to people or ask whoever is the main coordinator of this leadership workshop to send that to you, so you'll have the proper links if anyone is interested. But we do encourage you to really consider taking these trainings. We know it's a commitment. I took the People's Institute training in '92 and my daughter was 5, and getting babysitters, of course, as you all know, it was kind of hard when your husband works every weekend. So, but that's me, right? It was really important for me to take it. And Annalise just took it, was it last year or 2 years ago, Annalise, the People's Institute?
It was right before the pandemic, so 2020.
Right. Okay, yeah. So that's it. I don't know if we're doing questions or just moving on to the next.
We'll take questions at the end. So folks, note your questions or write them into the chat. We don't have a lot more material to present, so I just would rather us present it all, and then folks can ask questions specifically.
Okay, so I'm going to pass it off to Annalise to talk about the Allies for Racial Equity and Blue.
Oh, I didn't know I was presenting on that. Sorry, I thought that was Eighth Principle.
Yeah, I mean, I
Task
can
Force.
just hand that
Sorry.
over. Yeah, I mean, simply all we were asked to do was just to remind folks that some of these groups continue. So there have been groups that have been formed. Blue, which is the Black Lives of Unitarian Universalists. There's chapters of those in many congregations, including ours. And that actually existed before COVID and before the Eighth Principle Initiative. The Allies for Racial Equity, however, was something that was a little newer, and that is a white identified group, unpacking and processing how they can best be allies. Both of those groups are still up and running and doing well, and that's really, I think, if you have something else to share about either of those groups, let me know. But they are part of our fabric of social justice learning and ministry.
I'll just jump in for folks who are here that there may be some question like, well, I know ARE has been meeting for a year and a half or whatever, and maybe it's too late, but it's not. Like we are structuring it so that people can join at any time, and it's just a matter of knowing what we are discussing for that night. So I happen to be leading that group, and folks can find us on Realm or get in touch with me to learn more about it.
And I think that's all I have to really share about that specifically. After I will let Jane and Annalise share about the UUA analysis matrix. You know what? Let me share a couple other slides first. These slides I have actually make sense, Jane, before you share the next piece, if that's okay. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and share that right now. All right. So the Eighth Principle and Intersectionality, I left off on this before I handed it over. But this is part of our growing understanding about how these systems of power and oppression work. That what we recognize as injustice often is complicated by other forms of neglect or oppression or injustice. And we've chosen, at least for now, to call these intersecting, and the notion of it is intersectionality. Um, and so it simply recognizes that racism and other oppressions, sexism and homophobia, etc., anti-Semitism, are all integrated into all aspects of our culture, just because of the 500 and more years of white supremacy and other ideas. It doesn't mean that everything about our culture is awful and it needs to be dismantled, but it does mean that this history has colored almost everything in our cultural contact. And so, especially when you look at the way stories were told, and and you look at the way that media was representing who America is and what America ought to be. Most of us grew up with not a very full and complete and just picture of who we are and who we could and should be. Um, and so the long process to try and undo white supremacy reflects a lack of urgency to accomplish this, and the perpetuation of the system. And the other reason to understand intersectionality, one of my social justice warrior friends, he was a black Baptist preacher, and he would get irritated at members of his congregation who were resistant to wanting to stand up for LGBTQ rights. And what he would say, and to his people, he was a man of great, integrity and power. He would say, we cannot compare oppressions. you know um, these all these compressions are coming from the same place of misunderstanding, if not hatred, and the desire for conquest and control. So the notion of intersectionality is to remind us that we should hopefully not be divided as the forces that try and resist dismantling oppressions try to gain power over us and to get us fighting amongst each other instead of actually doing the work of dismantling oppression. And so the eighth principle is a foundation for this intersectionality, and for conceptualizing, groups of people or social problems as affected by a number of discriminations and disadvantages, taking into account people's overlapping identities and experiences. And so just one more thing about the eighth principle is that the eighth principle implementation team, which currently consists of a member of the board, a member from the Council of Ministries, and the original eighth principle task force members who have all stayed on. That includes David Hanley, Nicole Gray, Shannon Gattens, and myself. And at that, I'm going to hand it over to Jane and Elise to explain this analysis matrix, because this is going to need some explaining, because this is something sort of brand new. I actually don't know much about this myself as someone engaged in our denomination's practices and policies.
All righty. I don't know if I'm going to go into it enough detail. We'll see. Hopefully this works. Okay, you should be able to see this. So the Undoing Racism team, everyone can see? You have to verbally tell me, I can't see you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the Undoing Racism team recently developed their charge document, and as a main focus and new focus for the Undoing Racism team, we wanted to look a little closer. A lot of Undoing Racism work has been, in the broader community, and we wanted to take a look at our own community and see how we're doing. And so we discovered this rubric. I have the website I can share with you if you're interested, which is the Anti-Racism Rubric for UU Congregations. And it has three categories to sort of see where you land with a variety of areas of the congregation, whether it's a status quo congregation that has white cultural hegemony, or it's a multiculturally aware congregation, sort of in the middle, like you're doing okay, but more work to be done, otherwise known as passive, or you are an anti-racist congregation, you're actively anti-racist, right? And that being an action, not really sort of a static place. But I also wanted to say that this rubric that we'll be using is it looks at these things to work towards an anti-racist, anti-oppression, multicultural place. So to get to that level, and so to speak back to that intersecting oppressions, it's really looking at oppressions in general. And the areas of focus within the rubric are outlined here. There's a small team of members of the UUCM who have met twice now. And we've tried to gather folks from different areas of leadership. I believe we have one from the board, from the national, I'm sorry, not the national, the nominating and leadership development team. From URT, we have someone from Council on Ministries. And Janie, you can jump in to fill on anything I've missed there. But these are the areas of focus within the rubric. And this small team that has met so far has looked at the rubric in these areas and said, what do we think is needing to be sort of addressed first? What do we want to dive into first? And so we chose the areas of mission and purpose, leadership, religious education for adults, religious education for children and youth, partnership and solidarity with community, and membership and welcoming. And so, as I mentioned, we're at the very beginning stages. Our next meeting will be outlining what we think, how we think we should approach this analysis. And our task tonight was to let leaders know in the congregation how you can engage and how you can expect to engage in this work. And I would just say at this point, that is what we're developing, and it depends on the area of focus exactly how we will be collecting information about where we think we land on the rubric, and then being able to analyze that information that we collect, and then being able to provide recommendations based on what we find. And I think that's it. And so it's very much at the beginning stages. Like I said, I'm happy to share the rubric with anyone. And it's really, we all want to be the best congregation that we can be for everyone and for the community. So we're really just looking to try to get ourselves to that ultimate anti-racist, anti-oppression, multicultural congregation. That's it.
All right. So let me take us back to the 8th principle. Oh, sorry, I still have my camera thing on. So I have a couple of questions here for us, but I'm just going to take us back to just one screen and then ask if there's any questions about the presentation. Then I have some questions I want us all to respond to. Okay? And basically, I'm just going to share one more time the 8th principle itself. We, the member congregations of the UUA, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions. So, first, any questions for Annalise, Jane, or myself to clarify anything from the presentations? Just clarifying questions first. Sure, Nancy.
I'm just curious about the Annalise, the rubric and everything. Are you going to go around to each group and ask like questions of them? Is there like something we fill out, or how do you get the information?
Yeah, that's a great question. Then it's exactly what our next step is with as a group is to figure out, because like I said, different areas of focus will have a different approach.
Mhm.
And we'll need to develop what we're asking, who we're asking it of, so that's in the planning stages at this point. And I know that, we're all trying to ease back into you know something like normal life. I don't know that we'll ever have that again, but we understand that we want to be cognizant of everyone's time and be very sort of careful about overloading anyone or any one group. So just keeping that in mind, and we are developing those as we speak, I guess.
Thank you.
And that's also why Ray Dumont is on it from the Council on Ministries as kind of that connector piece, so that people are not going to be overburdened by information that needs to be asked of the congregation, and there would not be overlapping of it. And just as a matter of fact, like Eileen Delahunty is here as kind of our liaison to religious education for children. And, so Eileen will be part of deciding which areas of the rubric when we get to that point. And I'm not involved in this part of it, actually. I've stepped back from this work. I'm doing other work on the Undoing Racism team. But I've just, attended the first two meetings just to be there as a resource and answer questions. Because we've looked at the rubric too for quite some time. And because we wrote it into the charge document, we are now doing it. And we want to work closely with the eighth principle project implementation team in order to carry out this work, because it is a key part of the accountability in that principle.
I have a question. So sounds like what you're presenting to us is sort of informational, what the group is up to, what they're doing, what the next steps are, and that's very helpful for sure. But in the context of leadership training, how would leaders of the congregation, what would their role be in this? You know what I'm saying? I mean, how can you help us to help move? It's a cultural shift, obviously, within the congregation. So how would you help? How would you? I know you mentioned the training opportunities earlier in the presentation. To get, I guess, those are available for anyone who wants them, I guess, to help them every individual become more aware of this. So that's one thing, but what else besides that?
Sure, I appreciate that, Matt, and Annalise and Jane, if you have anything, please chime in. So one of the things we're looking at locating and devising for us is kind of a checklist of how to sort of stay right with the eighth principle. Some of the things that are going to be on it is who is in your group. Are the people that we hope that to become, are they represented on our group? Are there people of color represented in the group and in leadership, whether current or emerging leadership? Whenever we consider our events, how are we considering our audience? Our expected people to come. How are we expecting or changing our event to attract folks, from a diversity of identities? How are we able to message things in ways that may not just be white normative, in our communication styles and even in their communication venues? So we haven't really found this yet, but I know that's some of the work that I hope the eighth principle team works on next. And these are the kind of things that we would challenge leaders to work into their thinking about whatever they're planning, from the earliest stages. One of the things that we've learned in COVID more than anything, that is how important advanced planning is. And I think sometimes our biggest mistakes are when we rush to put events and programs together. You may have seen some planning notes come out from me in the spring, because we noticed people kept planning things without really thinking through technology, for instance. And, our strong suggestion and challenge is, from your very first meeting, have someone who understands technology at that planning session, so you know what you can do and maybe what you can't do. And also, as far as the eighth principle, from that very first planning session, how do we change the culture? So from our very first dreaming sessions about what we are planning to do as a congregation, that focus, not just on invitation, but also on something that's going to actively dismantle the oppressions we seek to rid the world of, are being considered in the earliest stages of the planning.
I'll just add to Matt, that recommendations. Let me back up a sec. When Jane and I met with Revanya, going over this congregational focus initiative, she suggested that we focus on systems, and that's very much what we're planning to do. And it's by looking at those systems and analyzing them that we can come up with recommendations. And so I don't know that this particular leadership training I have something to offer necessarily, except for the trainings, but that's what the hope is. And so maybe by next leadership training or at some point, but that's what the hope is to get to with this analysis.
And I'll just mention that we had made an offer in the summer, but the summer was so crazy for everybody. The offer was accepted by the Allies for Racial Equity, an obvious choice, as well as the Senior Lunch Bunch, to look at the 1-hour video of the Women's History Month presentation, where these women specifically talked about how they can be supported as women of color in leadership positions. And then we developed a leadership discussion guide that you could discuss with your group. So this was for covenant groups. This was for any group within UUCM. And, I had sent it out to every leader. We know how crazy the summer was, but to me, this was just a tool for people to use, a UUCM focused event that you just can watch anytime on Zoom for an hour. And then you get together with your group and you go through these 3 or 4 specific crafted questions. We had crafted the leadership discussion guide with other people who had planned that event. We, of course, had gotten permission from the panelists to be involved in that. And the Senior Lunch Bunch had a robust discussion about it, and just, looked at scenarios as to, how when you're in a situation where there's a woman of color and she's not being, properly given her due respect, which happens a lot to, unfortunately, women of color in power positions. How can you stand up as an ally, right? And I know the Allies for Racial Equity had a wonderful discussion about it too. So to me, this is also just a tool that people can use, and we can resend that around as well if anybody is interested, because it's to me it's just a short, sweet, easy way to do it. Yes, Nancy.
No, I just meant I didn't see it come by my way, but I'd like to see it. Maybe you could send it again to all the teams.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe it's the summer. I don't know.
It might have been, either that interim period too, where people were changing over.
So this is Reverend Scott again, and so those kind of opportunities are great, and I really appreciate Jane for packaging that up like that. It was a great event, and it's nice to be able to continue allowing an event like that to continue to enrich us. The other thing that I think is important for me to report is I'm in contact with Andrea McChristian and some of the folks at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, because what I wanted to create was a group of accountability. So for instance, whenever us as white identified folks are doing stuff in the name of racial justice or awareness. It's important that we're touching base, with people who actually share the identity about which we're speaking. And so that's why, for instance, last year when I taught Slavery by Another Name, I had Becky Doggett, so I had an African American co-teacher, and I had folks from that identity in my other classes as well. And when I ran an entire year program, actually it was a 2-year program in my former congregation called Race in America Today, which was about 8 different sermons and 7 classes and films and guest speakers. I had a committee of folks who I knew, professionals of color that I was in conversation with when I developed that curriculum, to make sure that I was, presenting, what they thought was useful, meaningful stuff in a useful and meaningful way. And we would have reflection conversations afterward to unpack how it went and maybe, how I could do it even better next time. And so in my conversations with Andrea McChristian, she's going to help me put together a small external body of folks that, that I'll meet with, and I'll invite some of our leaders in either Eighth Principle and or Undoing Racism to join us, to meet like 2 or 3 times a year and just process what we're doing and maybe what we're thinking about doing going forward. Because I think that's one of the pieces that gets missed a lot, is how do you form a real relationship and have accountability to the community that you're claiming to serve. And there's no other way than to simply do it and to create a group that you're willing to empower and support and take their advice. So I want to let you know that that is in process, and hopefully, because of, everything going on and no one knowing what's happening with the pandemic, I don't expect a lot of these initiatives or anything to really begin to take much shape real soon. And that's just the way it is, because, there is a whole lot going on, and it's hard to get people's attention. We're finding, and that's okay. It's okay if we move slowly, so long as we keep moving.
Other questions?
I
Ideas?
just sort of a question, because I've been thinking about RE and how to look through a lot of the program, because RE's really starting from scratch in COVID, and we're trying to come up with some new programs that'll be more inclusive of different ages. But I'm trying to look at it through the lens of anti-racism, and I'm trying to develop some programs on my own for kids. But I'm going to need some advice and some help. I've done some anti-racism training. So I'm wondering, who are the folks that I can lean on? Would that be the Undoing Racism group? Is that, if I have questions, or if I want to make sure that I'm getting it right? I'm talking with Jerry Freed about maybe putting together a photography class, but I want to put in, how are people represented in various forms of photography, and I want to put an anti-racism lens on it. But I want to do it right. I don't want to mess it up. So,
So they're good questions, Eileen. Of course, the director of religious education is a woman of color, so I would certainly start with Judith. And I also know that I know Jane has a lot of experience with the People's Institute, so we could probably create a small advisory group out of some of the members who might have some more experience in this stuff, to assist in projects like this.
great.
There's so much interconnectedness already. So Eileen Birmingham is here, and we were asked by the Anti-Racist Alliance of North Jersey, or I was, because I was at their meeting last month, to have a program focused on the school to prison pipeline. And of course, we asked the restorative justice folks that Eileen is part of this New Jersey restorative justice. What's it called?
Restorative Justice Network.
Restorative Justice Network. So there's a lady like right next door to me in Livingston, Trisha Idrobo, whom I reached out to but anyway, she's gotten speakers for that. And my point being is that, Annalise, we're getting hopefully some new people into the Undoing Racism team as we move forward in this year. But I'm here to serve Annalise essentially and help with these kinds of connections, because the connections are so important and like so amazing when they happen, and they happen, I don't know, to me, it's like ringing a bell. I've helped somebody, get a job. I mean, that's what I used to do at NJIT. So if I can help young people make connections, or help you, Eileen, and you call me anytime and we'll go on walks, right? Eileen and I live like 5 minutes from each other, to brainstorm ideas and get you connected to the right people, that if we can't help you with that curriculum development, we know people that probably can.
Perfect. Thanks. I'm going to put up these questions. These were developed by the 8th Principal team, and I just put them in your chat. I'm just going to share the screen for a moment so you can see them larger than the chat. And, I don't expect us all to, exhaustively answer these, but these are good questions for us to be asking often in congregational life as we're embarking this first program year after passing the 8th principle. So how do we broaden ownership and embrace of the 8th principle? So, you guys are doing that now by showing up to this in all the leadership circles you're in. That broadening the ownership and embrace is simply reminding the folks that you work with, that we have an 8th principle, and to look at everything we're doing through that lens. How do we weave into all our programming decisions the awareness of dismantling racism and intersecting oppressions? So this is sort of happens at the meta level, and I think may require us to have like an extra day. Sometimes in the springtime we have that sort of master program planning summit where we look at the big things we want to do for the next program year. It usually happens like the second or third week of April. And I think, one of the things that I will always say in every group is the earlier that you're thinking about what you're doing, the more likely it can be done very well, right? So what will you do to assure your UCM is living into the 8th principle? And that's more of a personal question, for individual ownership. But these are just questions I think early on for us here in this process to really, be cognizant of asking ourselves and the teams we work with as we're trying to do our best to walk our talk. So I don't know if anyone has any responses to any of these questions the 8th principle put out. How do we broaden ownership and embrace the 8th principle? How do we weave into all our programming decisions the awareness of dismantling racism and intersecting oppressions? And what will you do to assure your UCM is living into this principle?
Not a reaction to the questions, but when Matt said his question, it was what was in my mind. Mm-hmm. And as here is in my role as chair of COM, and even thought as we're reworking our covenant, do we work in the 8th principle to bring greater focus to it? So one thing I'd like to know is, can we have the slide you just showed, the PowerPoint slide, sent to us? Because that can be organizing questions for us to bring up at meetings as a start. But those Certainly. Are the questions that I had. Like, what can Council on Ministries do? I know Ray is on it as a brand new member of COM to be that liaison. So she, she'll sort of be a source for us. But anyway, I think this group will keep us informed if there's things you think COM could be doing.
Yeah, and of course, Nicole Gray is also on the 8th Principle Task Force and on Council on Ministries, so we have a Naturalliais there as well. Yep.
Okay. Deb, I like that idea. I think that sometimes when we have monthly meetings, and I always have a check-in question, so maybe that could be a check-in question, one of those questions. So I think that's a really good idea. And maybe we can spend more time on that, the quarter of the hour or whatever, or however long it is. So I think that's a start. And then, we can continue with the other questions and really act and live on it during the month before the other meeting.
I know on the board, we always finish the meeting with an assessment of the meeting. We make sure that we spend a couple of minutes. So there's an individual who's responsible for checking the tone of the meeting, if there were any moments that that were difficult or challenging, and how did the members address that? So it's sort of like a self-assessment review at the end of each meeting, checklist kind of a thing that I think helped all of us to be conscious of it during the meeting. And I think, over time, it's not like there's it's like the sensitivity police. That's not that. It's more about, being able to step back and evaluate how the meeting went in the context of the eighth, in a variety of things, but the eighth principle, I think, could be included in that assessment.
So the function that you're speaking of, Matt, in the board is known as the process observer.
That's correct.
And there actually is a sheet that the process observer can use to guide their, analysis in the meeting. It's, how do we deal with conflict? Were voices silenced or, encouraged? It's those kind of questions. And, and I imagine an eighth principle question could easily be added to that list. I don't know who owns the current list, but I'm sure it's on the board documents, and I'll look for it.
But that process review questions, I'm not sure, for example, if council ministry has that or does that too. Or I know I'm on NLEC now, and I know our meetings are more sort of formative. We're just sort of forming.
Most groups don't do that, and it's we do recommend it, but we also know that folks really do try to keep their meeting time to an hour when at all possible, especially when it's on Zoom. Understood. All the time. So I think we can repackage that and make some suggestions. We're about to be called back to the main room. If you have any other questions, send them to Jane, Annalise, or myself. And
thank you, everybody.